Podcast.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and oh God, we are in the home stretch to episode 300. And, you know, look, episode 100 got blitzed. Just giant glass mug of just the most diabolical Long Island iced tea, basically, that I could possibly make. Episode 200 went crazy on the synthetic hemp stuff. All right, 300 feels like I should just drop acid, but I probably can't. Won't. Mostly because I don't know how I would be able to get my hands on it, but also I got two kids, just two little toddler babies running around, and I should be more responsible. So what if I maybe flipped the script and just did episode 300 dead clean sober, like the other episodes that I do? Who knows? Who knows? It will all depend on when I'm able to record and if, all of them are out of the house. And that's going to be real hard to do, at least at this point, right? So I don't know. That bit within the bit may not make it that to episode 300, and that's fine. We'll just do something bigger for episode 400 because that'll be a couple years down the line. And the kids will be more mobile at that point. I don't know. Maybe we'll just whatever. I don't know. Maybe we'll send them to school, and I'll just have the longest day of my life and take it. I don't know. We'll figure it out. I don't know. I haven't decided yet, which is weird for me. I usually have all my decisions decided. So I don't know, but it is going to be a crazy episode. I can tell you that it is. If you thought the stories that I told in episode 200 were silly, just about Florida, these are crazier. I promise you that. But we're not talking about episode 300. We're talking about today's episode. And it is the third time that we are talking about some real government projects that should really make you reconsider maybe your stance on America's number one. We're the good guys. We're not the good guys. We are not. The part one, back on episode 73, part two, back on episode 249, if you want to go and check those out. It's just, oh man, like, I think I said this last week. This is just all the stuff that we know, and it's insane. I can't imagine what kinds of nonsensical diabolatry, that's not a word, but it should be, are in the deepest annals of the CIA and even the FBI, because the FBI was up to some stuff too. But, oh man. All right. So we're going to get into it today. We got 4 stories. We're covering Project Orion, the Gateway process, something about a cow, and then our first story will be of the Bath Riots.
Story time. Story time. Story time? Story time.
So this first one is slightly different from the others in the sense that, like, everybody knew this was happening, and so that's why this is called real government projects, not secret government. Because this happened. We're starting with the Bath Riots, I should clarify. But, like, I think I said that before the music hit. Oh, boy, this is going to... Oh, God. This is what happens when I go a while without recording. because I get so far ahead that I buy myself some time, right? And then I come back and record and I forget how to do a podcast. So the Bath Riots, this was just the government being terrible. And so, it goes back to the Mexican Revolution, and the United States during the Mexican Revolution decided that it really wasn't that big of a deal, mostly because they were more focused on World War I, which was also happening at the same time, which is crazy, right? Like, I did not realize that, but the Mexicans were having a revolution during World War I. And it wasn't like really a part of it because it's Mexico. They got their own problems. They're not fighting in World War I. We kind of probably assumed they were because like Canada was fighting in World War I, but no, Mexico was just like doing their own thing. So President Woodrow Wilson, because of World War I, withdrew the U.S. troops that were stationed in Mexico, which then allowed Pancho Villa to escalate several border skirmishes. Remember Pancho Villa? Never mind. I was thinking of Santa Anna. I was about to, woo boy. This is terrible. That's bad. Like, I was about to be like, yeah, remember Pancho Villa when he like got his leg blown off and gave it a full military funeral? No, that was Santa Anna. That was 40, 50 years earlier. I thought that was the same guy. It wasn't. Look, we all make mistakes. You ever make a mistake? Happened to me. So we're going to forget that. Pancho Villa, he's the big character in the Mexican Revolution. He's doing all the things, right? And so when the United States withdrew all of their troops from Mexico, Pancho Villa decided to escalate several skirmishes on the border. Even more, an outbreak of typhus was ravaging the area thanks to a ton of head lice. I didn't know head lice could give you typhus. I just thought that was a thing that happened to little kids in school. Remember when we were growing up, every cartoon had an episode about the kids getting lice. It's crazy. They still do it. It's quicksand or head lice. That was like the biggest things that we had to worry about as kids. Not that big of a deal, I think. Like, I don't remember having a head lice issue. I don't remember my brother having a head lice crisis in school. It feels like a thing that TV really blew out of proportion. Which, and I don't know, and maybe not. Maybe everyone else had different experiences. I don't know. But it was always like, oh, everybody's going to shave their heads and use this special shampoo. And everybody was afraid of the shampoo for some reason. I don't know. But like, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so there's a ton of head lice out there in Mexico along the border. And Thomas Callaway Lee Jr., the newly elected mayor of El Paso, Texas, was sick of all of the fighting that was kind of spilling over the border from the Mexican Revolution and all the head lice that were just flying or bouncing or jumping around. I don't know how lice travel, you guys. So he sent telegrams to U.S. senators demanding a quarantine order to prevent the, direct quote here, dirty, lousy, destitute Mexicans. Jesus. From spreading typhus all over the city. And like, honestly, that was probably the nicest way he could have said it at the time. At the time, all right? This is 1917, all right? They probably thought even less of them. That he probably went through a couple of revisions to make that sound nicer, and that's where it landed. El Paso Public Health Officer Dr. B.J. Lloyd realistically believed that the typhus outbreak wasn't as bad as Lee was making out to be, and he was right, it wasn't. But he did offer to open several delousing plants in the city to combat the disease. U.S. officials thought this was a great idea. They quickly sided with Dr. Lloyd and adopted a policy, very quick policy, of sanitizing every Mexican immigrant they could get their hands on. So not even, like, this is like almost the opposite of ICE, where like they're just running around and going to round up Mexicans and give them a bath, not throw them back over the border. And this was like a sweeping policy too, right? Like the United States, like the plan was to start with stations in El Paso at the border there, but then they were going to just quickly build or incorporate stations across the entire U.S.-Mexico border. Of course, because it was the U.S. government, the entire process was pretty inhumane and unnecessarily frustrating. At any given delousing station, men were separated from the women and children. Both sides were then stripped completely nude and inspected for lice. Not just like combing through your hair. Drop trowel, bro. We got to check your pubes. Got to check your leg hair. Let's check under your pitties. Let's see if you got some lice pitties or whatever. I don't just over the top and unnecessary. Some of them were even photographed. Why? Why do you got to photograph them? Well, you just like, oh yeah, oh ma'am, okay, we're gonna take a couple pictures here. That's lice, no lice, that's good. Got a nice Fu Manchu down there. That's crazy. Look at the shape on that. Wow. Click, 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 snap some pictures. But like, it's 1917, so it like takes forever to take a picture of something. Anyway, I don't know. Why? That's the question. Why was that necessary? Clothes and other valuables were either steamed or bathed in cyanogen gas, which was this highly toxic form of cyanide that produces the second hottest natural flame when burned in oxygen. How hot is the second hottest natural flame? 8,177 degrees Fahrenheit. How did anything, and maybe they weren't burning everything in that, because that would have incinerated everything. No one would have had any clothes or anything after that. So like, I don't know that they were burning it at 8,000 degrees, but like, that's the kind of stuff that they were working with to get rid of the lice. Men who were found infected with lice had their heads shaved, while women had their heads bathed in a mixture of vinegar and kerosene. Seems unsafe. If the lice survived that, the process was repeated until they were dead. Once a person then passed the test, they were gathered in a group and hosed down with liquid soap and kerosene oil before being unceremoniously tossed back out into public. On January 28th, 1917, government lice inspectors, that was a real job that you could have. They ordered 17-year-old Carmelita Torres to get off the trolley she was riding and undergo the disinfection process. Torres, having heard rumors that the women were being photographed nude while in the delousing bath, she refused. And that's probably should have been her right, but under the law, probably wasn't. She also had heard reports of bathers being set on fire, which sounds ridiculous, but had actually happened the previous year at the El Paso County Jail when 28 immigrants died after someone lit a cigarette, igniting all of the kerosene gas in the air that was being used to delouse them. And look, hang on. Whoever it was that lit the cigarette, that's just you being a dummy. You can't do that. That's silly. There had to have been a no smoking sign, very flammable environment. Probably not. It was 1916, but whatever. It's crazy. So that happened. All right. Well, when Torres was then refused entry to her job without undergoing the disinfection, as well as a refund in her trolley fare, she convinced several other women on the trolley to join her in her protest. And within minutes, it wasn't just several women. It was thousands of people yelling and throwing rocks at basically just everyone, regardless of where they stood on the issue. It just devolved into anarchy very quickly. A cable car driver and a mail coach driver were both beaten by the rioters for no real reason, just that everybody was mad about being forced to take a kerosene bath. The next day, the rioting women had been replaced by rioting men who used the delousing baths as an opportunity to protest Venustiano Carranza, who had been elected as Mexico's new leader. I don't know why. I don't know what the connection was. But the police chief of Juarez, the city on the other side of the border of El Paso, ordered all rioters to be arrested and called in the Mexican cavalry to disperse everyone who was occupying the bridge that crossed the Rio Grande and acted as the border. Meanwhile, private business owners worked with the El Paso Chamber of Commerce to come up with a deal regarding lice certificates that were being issued that allowed Mexican immigrants to actually go to work. The next day, El Paso and Juarez authorities worked together to then end the riots. 3 people were arrested for assaulting a customs officer, but no one actually died from this, which is rare. Despite initially being hailed as the Latina Rosa Parks, Carmelita Torres was quickly forgotten for her actions in the Bath Riots, mainly because the Immigration Act of 1917 was passed a few weeks later, which created stronger restrictions for Mexican immigrants entering the United States. So, like, she kind of had the opposite effect, where, like, back before then, because I think we talked about this, I think in the last Wacky Wars episode, where people would just more or less freely come over the border, and immigration was a little bit more lax. Well, partly because of these Bath riots, the Immigration Act of 1917 was passed, and the border started to get super strict, and was really one of the big catalysts for why it is the way it is today. Although the typhus outbreak subsided in the following months, the bathing and fumigations for Mexicans entering the United States actually continued into the 1950s and used clearly dangerous chemicals like DDT and Zyklon B, which were used by the Nazis to kill 1.1 million people in the gas chambers. Womp womp. You thought the Nazis had done all that. We're the only ones that... Nope. The United States was gassing Mexicans. Now, look, they weren't gassing them to the point of killing them. They were gassing them to the point of trying to kill lice. But it doesn't make it any better. It was still bad. Anyway, that's the point. Moving on to around the time that scientists were plotting exactly how to nuke the moon with Project A119, which we covered in part 2 of this series back on episode 249, and you should absolutely go refresh yourself on that story. Another group of more reasonable scientists were figuring out how to execute a more logical alternative, which was to send 3,000 nukes to Saturn. Anyway, Stanislav Ulam, one of the scientists who had worked on the Manhattan Project, complained that the rockets being used by NASA at the time, this is the 50s, they were very wasteful with their energy distribution, and argued that rockets and spaceships could actually be powered by nuclear pulse propulsion, and thus Project Orion was born. Now, nuclear pulse propulsion, in its simplest terms, is basically the act of detonating nuclear warheads at the rear of a ship and using the force from that blast to basically just yeet the ship further into space. Sounds very plausible and kind of overly simplistic for what it's worth. The Advanced Research Projects Agency loved this idea so much that they apportioned $1 million to explore the viability of such a project. Scientists quickly used that money to discover that detonating a megaton nuclear bomb every 3 seconds for 10 straight days could send a spaceship to Mars in less than 2 weeks, as compared to the 7 months that it currently would take given our current technology. At the same rate, it could then get to Saturn in 7 months, and Alpha Centauri, the closest other star to Earth other than the sun, could get there in 133 years. Now, did they stop to consider how many nuclear bombs they would need? Yes. Did they think that they would be able to produce that many nuclear bombs? Probably. They were just mass producing them at this point. And they just they were like, oh man, this is great. We could just go to another star in 133 years. It seems reasonable. We can just go to Saturn. Why not Jupiter or, Neptune or whatever? But no, Saturn. That was the one they picked. I don't know why. Before NASA could decide on whether or not they wanted to actually proceed with this project, the Air Force jumped in and actually provided additional funding to create non-nuclear models of this. So basically just high-powered bombs that could be detonated and, propel the ship forward. After a test using C4 on a model rocket was apparently successful enough, scientists then set to work on drafting a spaceship that could handle all of the nuclear warheads, as well as enough people to make a trip to some undiscovered part of the solar system worth it. They got so far with this. And so, in the end, the Orion starship that they modeled out was basically designed to look like the spaceship version of a submarine. It was a multi-tiered tube with a thick steel alloy hull. It would also have a massive bumper plate, as was 100,000% necessary, on the 1,300-foot long ship, which would separate 200 passengers from over 1,000 nuclear weapons. Oh, man. The problem, however, among many, was that the only way that anyone was going to get a ship that massive into space was that they were going to have to detonate the nuclear weapons inside the Earth's atmosphere, which would have created a fireball brighter than anything the sun ever wished it could produce, and endangering everyone within a 50-mile radius of the launch site. And 50 miles seems way too small. Like, I think if that blasted off, if the giant nuclear spaceship submarine blasted off from Cape Canaveral, Florida, just like all of Florida is uninhabitable at this point, right? And probably a lot of the Caribbean and maybe half of Georgia, right? Like, just like you just impossible. The fallout from the launch would also cause more cancer than anyone wanted to deal with. Not to mention that if the launch failed, and then the chain reaction of over 1,000 nuclear bombs going off would essentially obliterate the entire planet, right? So, and here's the thing, that didn't seem like a problem to anyone. The only reason that this project died was because the United States signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963, and the project was put on pause. And only parts of this project were ever actually declassified, which means that there are other parts of this project we still don't know about, which is concerning, given how insane what we already know was. Like, how did they start building it? Is like parts of it in like some old missile silo somewhere? Underground base? I don't know. That would be crazy if it did. Oh boy. Anyway. Moving on. During the 1960s now, and America's race to see what it could all possibly nuke, the government created Thor Able-Star, which was this type of launch system that could propel rockets much more efficiently than whatever past systems they were using. Even more, this new system could propel rockets with higher payloads thanks to a multiple burn trajectory that allowed rockets to reach different orbits. Surely this means something significant in rocket science. I don't know. Over the 6 years that Thor Able-Star was used, 19 rockets were launched. 5 of them failed in some way, which at a 74% success rate was about the best the government could have hoped for in the 1960s. They were working so far ahead of the technology that they were like, their scientific understanding compared to the level of science and technology and physics they were playing with, just a gigantic gap. And so a 74% success rate's not bad, right? On November 30th, 1960, one such launch failed miserably, and several parts of this destroyed rocket landed in Cuba. And if you know anything about United States and Cuba relations in the 1960s, that's not good, all right? It's not a great thing. The Cuban government quickly arrived at the crash site and began collecting the parts of this rocket so that they could then sell them to Russia and China. But as Cuban soldiers were cleaning up the field, they realized that something even more terrible had happened. A flaming piece of rocket debris had landed on and killed a cow named Ruhina. With an official casualty now part of this incident, Fidel Castro actually used this to threaten war against the United States and actually filed a formal complaint with the United Nations. Hundreds of Cuban students quickly assembled outside of the American embassy in Cuba with their own cows and began chanting, "With cows or without cows, the revolution will win." It's not a great chant, right? And maybe something got lost in the translation from English to Spanish. I don't know. But, it's not great. One cow was even covered with a sheet with the message, "Eisenhower, you murdered one of my sisters," written on it. Great. The U.S. government quickly apologized for the incident and actually paid Cuba $2 million in compensation, which the Cuban government used to hold an elaborate state funeral for Ruhina. Not to improve their infrastructure or anything, but to give this cow a funeral. Anyway, that was real stupid. Our final story might be even dumber. So as the Cold War continued on, we're into the 1980s now, the CIA came to realize that the future of spying would begin to take place far beyond computers, where it currently is, and other technology, and instead would be waged through astral projection. When I tell you they were working so far ahead beyond their own understanding, this is what I'm talking about. Even more, the CIA was wholly convinced that the Russians were already close to perfecting a super soldier with psychic abilities that could destroy anything using only its mind. The paranoia during the Cold War. And look, I get some of it was legit. This is insane. In response, with this belief that the Russians had a psychic super soldier, the CIA tasked Lieutenant Colonel Wayne McDonald to build a psychic spy of their own. The government looked into research conducted back in the 1950s by broadcast executive Robert Monroe, who had discovered that specific sound patterns could affect a person's level of alertness, sleepiness, and states of consciousness. During his experiments, and that's pretty basic, right? Like, specific sound patterns, I mean, like, people have white noise machines. We have white noise machines, wave sounds of ocean waves to help people sleep better. Like, that makes sense, right? Smoke detector alarms. That will raise your level of alertness far beyond what it needs to be, but it's effective, right? So, like, that's sound science right there. During Monroe's experiments, he experienced quote-unquote sensations of paralysis and vibrations that resulted in 9 out-of-body experiences over the course of 6 weeks. That seems suspicious. And so with that information on this study that's like 30 years old, the CIA developed the Gateway process, which was this training system that attempted to get people to focus on their brain waves in such a way that it would alter their consciousness to escape the limitations of time and space. This is a thing that our government was trying to do. So in other words, by using specific yet contrasting audio frequencies pumped directly into each side of your brain, the idea was that you could theoretically project mental energy in some superhuman way known as hemispheric synchronization because, sure. As he led the CIA study, Wayne McDonald believed that a person could use energy conversion, resonant humming, and other totally real things to unlock new mental abilities such as extrasensory perception, mentally locating people by seeing them on a map in your head, and then color breathing, which was a process where you could allegedly heal yourself by imagining very vivid colors. That doesn't work because it's not real. After 7 days of intense training, 5% of the CIA spies were found to have the potential to achieve astral projection and time travel. We're beyond, like, oh God, this was real. The government was like, yeah, we can do time travel. Like, are we really heavily influenced by Back to the Future right now? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know if that movie's come out yet. There's been other movies about time travel, I'm sure. So, like, we're going to try to do it because we don't understand the difference between life and imagination and make-believe. Whatever. God, those 5%, the 5% group of spies were then tasked with astrally projecting themselves into the past to receive deleted codes from a computer located on a different part of the planet. Guess what, guys? None of them were able to do it because, of course, they weren't. McDonald, however, believed that the failure to do so was because there were additional space-time dimensions that needed to be accounted for that they hadn't yet discovered or understood yet. Not because it's not real. And I appreciate the ambition, right? And the willingness, hello kitty, the willingness to not give up so easily. Because why not? We've still got probably millions in funding to burn through. Let's see it through. But good God. Another subject in this study was tasked with astrally projecting himself to Mars in the year 1 million BCE. This time, allegedly, the experiment was a success, with the spy claiming to witness the extinction of the Martian race. Or maybe he just made it all up. By 1993, the CIA realized that none of this was actually real and that they were wasting their time and money. The fact that they were still doing this in the 90s is crazy. The manual for unlocking the gateway process was declassified in 2017, with the exception of page 25, which was conveniently lost and allegedly contains McDonald's explanation of the true meaning of life. Okay, why, what happened there? That's weird. If you are interested, you can listen to the original Gateway tapes that McDonald developed and see if you can astrally project yourself somewhere new that, CIA spies could not.
All done.
All right. Real Government Projects, Part 3 in the books. Let us recap and see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number 1, the United States government forcibly captured Mexicans and threw them into bathhouses, stripped them naked, and then poured basically gasoline on them and shampoo, but some gasoline and vinegar, kerosene. And then somebody lit a cigarette and 28 people died at one point, but Jesus. Number 2, the United States had an actual plan to strap thousands of nuclear weapons onto the back of a rocket and send it to Mars or Saturn, which is real stupid. And even dumber, number 3, the United States government spent millions of dollars trying to train people on how to astrally project themselves and travel back in time. USA, USA, USA.
What did we learn?
Now look, I get that everything a government does isn't going to be a smash hit, right? But, there are ways to fail upwards. You can learn some stuff along the way. These were not it. This was absurdity for absurdity's sake almost. Just dumb. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. Next week on the show, I got one story for you about a guy that you probably have never heard of, but absolutely should, because he's a crazy person. We're looking at the story of Arno Funke, this German dude who was just he was a supervillain, just loved causing chaos for chaos's sake, but kind of was popular for it. That was weird. Germans are weird. We're going to cover his story next week. So thank you for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.
This is a podcast